Chapter 8. Derp and Xandies. Jacob winced when the harsh light of the station detention zone shined through the cruiser windows. He had tried to remember more for her during the drive, but his efforts had been futile, his attempts ending with him pounding his head with the heels of his tattooed hands.
"I just don't have the words,"
he said. As she pulled to a stop, he turned his face downward into his clasped hands and mumbled fervently, praying. Two detention officers, dressed in white, their bodies padded with rubber armor, waited outside the vehicle, each clutching a sedation stick. Sabrina winced with the memory of being charged with one. All cadets were required to experience what it felt like to be on the receiving end. It was far from a sedate experience. Half the class had lost control of their bowels, more than half their bladders. As she got out and the officers moved to the back of the cruiser, Sabrina felt a surge of protectiveness.
"Wait. This one is calm," she said. "At least for me."
She did not like the looks they gave her. The shorter one was named Rye. The pores of his flat nose stood out, black with dirt. He was a friend of Pitt and Boyle. The taller one was a classmate of hers named Andrew. Both lowered their sticks in Jacob's direction. Sabrina grimaced and lifted the door open. Jacob was trembling when she pulled him out. The bright lights of the bay cast him in a sickly pallor. There was more blood on him than she had realized. She had lost control, and she knew it. A wave of guilt rolled over her, and she rubbed her neck.
"Looks like you already subdued him pretty well,"
Rye laughed. Andrew looked back and forth between them before joining in the laughter. Jacob moved closer to her. He was trembling.
"Hey, Zoo. This one seems absolutely besotted with you," Rye said. "Maybe we should have more lady officers after all."
"Shut it," she said, but he was right. Jacob was cowering against her, staring up at her imploringly. Didn't he remember her beating him?
"He put up a good fight. Had a knife on him," she said, shoving him towards the door. "You both coming? Or are you going to stand around with your sticks up your asses?"
They followed, but neither held his stick at the ready. When they reached the processing desk, Rye and Andrew peeled off and entered the back office, where Sabrina could hear a game of pitchball on the wall screen. At this hour it must have been a recording, but it still interested the guards more than processing a prisoner. Xandies, an administrative officer who had graduated 2 years before Sabrina, waited at the desk. She had a pinched face and dark circles under her eyes, circles that stood out all the more against her pale skin. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight ponytail. Sabrina had suspected that she had wanted to be a street officer, but like most female cadets, had been forced into a desk position. Xandies' eyes passed over Sabrina's patrol suit, and she was nearly successful in suppressing a frown before she took down a palm screen and began typing.
"Location?"
"Hill 56, southeast face."
"Elevation?"
There was no reason for her to ask, except that she too was keeping score.
"Area 11.
Her eyebrows lifted, but her eyes did not move from the screen. Sabrina decided not to volunteer the information that Jacob actually reached the fence. Xandies would hear soon enough.
"Has he been interrogated?"
"Yes." "He said—" Sabrina stopped, shamed by a strange sense of confidence. "Mostly gibberish. I captured some on the voice recorder."
"Always is,"
Xandies said, checking off a box on the screen. "His hands were burning, though. I found the Steraspray helped."
"Uh-huh. Press his thumb here,"
Xandies said, holding out the palm screen. Sabrina helped Jacob reach over the counter and touch the screen. When the screen beeped, Xandies spoke into the comm piece on her collar.
"Processing call."
A moment later, Alex Derp stepped out of the office where the two detention guards had disappeared. The sounds of the game drifted out from the open door.
"Well, if it isn't Princess Cadet."
Sabrina stiffened. "Officer Derp, a little late for you to do intake," she said. Derp scratched the expansive lump of flesh that hung over his belt. He had not shaved in days, and crumbs lingered in his whiskers. His shirt was dark with grease stains. Sabrina and others considered him a disgrace to the uniform, but he had close friends in influential places, like Pitt and Boyle. And he ran a tight detention block. There had never been an escape on his watch. His gut was misleading. Although he was overweight, his shoulder muscles still strained against the largest of shirts, and his arms were as thick as most men's thighs. It was said that when walking the detention block, he didn't even bother with armor or a sedation stick.
Thomas was sick, so I'm filling in for him.
I heard something is going around. That is charitable of you, sir. He gave out a false chuckle. Xandy stood between them, staring at the floor, her hands balled into fists.
The boys tell me this one was besottled with you,
he said, looking over at Jacob and shifting his weight from one foot to the other.
I wanted to come out and see it for myself.
Sabrina tried hard not to look at Jacob, but she felt him trembling. He's no different than any other prisoner, sir.
Is that right? Now, having both your princesses might tame all these wretches. Maybe there's use for female officers after all.
He let out another chuckle and headed back to his office.
Officer Derp, aren't you going to process the prisoner?
Xandy said to his back.
You can do it, Xandes. We're watching the game.
Sir?
Xandy said, her inflection rising, but he had already shut the door. She slammed down the palm screen and yanked an oversized sedation stick from a locker. It whined as she charged it. She rounded the corner and yanked Jacob away by the collar.
Sabrina!
Jacob cried. Xandy stopped. Jacob was holding the edge of the counter, staring at Sabrina. Xandes looked back and forth between them, as if not believing what she was witnessing. Sabrina did not know how to respond. In the silence of her hesitation, Jacob spoke again.
Sabrina, please don't leave me.
Xandes grinned, revealing small teeth that were so white they were almost translucent.
Hey, Zoo, they were right. He is besotted with you. How did he learn your name? How did he remember it?
Must have caught it from one of the other officers.
Then why isn't he calling you Cadet Sabrina?
I don't know, Sabrina said. But if it makes it easier, I'll come along. To help you process him. Xandy seemed to weigh the option in her mind before nodding and motioning for Sabrina to follow. She shoved Jacob ahead of her and leveled the end of the stick at him, its prongs hovering just behind his bowed neck. They passed by the door to the office as a point was scored in the pitchball match. The men's furious cheers spilled out into the hall.
Daldo! Daldo! Daldo!
They chanted the name of their favorite player.
Where are you taking me?
Jacob asked.
Shut up!
Xandy said. Just a room where you can rest for the night, Sabrina said, although it earned her a scowl from Xandy's.
First, we're going to wash the stink off you,
Xandy said, turning Jacob around a corner and guiding him into a dark room. A rubber mat covered the floor. The air smelled damp. Xandy's pushed Jacob to the center of the room, removed his bindings, and ordered him to take off his clothes. Sabrina remained in the doorway, noting the camera ports in the corners of the room and wondering if anyone was watching or if the pitchball match was being broadcast on all internal monitors. He removed his shirt, revealing a chiseled frame overlaid with extravagant tattoos. There was a slight smile at the corner of Xandy's mouth. She flicked the switch of the stick on and off, allowing a small spark to arc between prongs.
All of them,
she added. Jacob slipped off his straw sandals. They were so worn that once removed, they surrendered any semblance to shoes. Still, Jacob placed them neatly side by side on the mat next to his folded shirt. He turned aside, removed his trousers, balled them in his hands, and covered his crotch with them. Xandy's crossed to the corner where a hose was hung, taking it in her free hand and aiming the nozzle at Jacob.
Drop the trousers,
she said, punctuating the sentence with a warning shot of spray in his face. Jacob turned Sabrina's way, but she could not meet his eye. He looked pathetic. Smeared in dirt, blood, his hair askew. His pulse was racing in his neck. He set his trousers beside his shirt. Xandy's made no effort to be discreet as her eyes studied Jacob's nakedness. Her lips puckered, and she sent a sidelong glance at Sabrina before squeezing the nozzle and sending a jet of water into Jacob's crotch, doubling him over. He turned his back to her to protect himself, while Xandy's laughter echoed in the chamber.
He looks nice from this side, too,
Xandy said, shaking the hose. Xandes, are you here to wash him or torture him? Sabrina said. Xandes shrugged and turned the blast of water on Jacob's head. Some inevitably went into his eyes, nose, and mouth, and he began to cough. Xandes giggled at this. He raised his hand as if to block the water. After a glare from Sabrina, Xandes sighed loudly and removed the stream from his face. While Jacob recovered, blinking the water out of his eyes, she nonchalantly turned it on his sandals. They seemed to dissolve as the stream of water swept them out of his reach. They swirled about the drain before all but the largest pieces were sucked away. Xandes twisted the nozzle head, and the stream became more of a mist. She ordered Jacob to stand up, his arms held out to his sides. The grit and blood washed away. Water foamed and cascaded off his muscular stomach. As she stared at his body, Sabrina did feel a certain tug deep inside her. It was not carnal. Standing in the cold water, his sex was shrunken, and did not draw Sabrina's gaze the way it did Xandes'. Instead, she was mesmerized by the writing, the script flowing over his body. In his nakedness, it was revealed in its completeness. It was beautiful, proportionate, balanced, like a complete thought captured. Sabrina was seized with the same feeling she had when studying one of Lindsay's paintings, as if she were looking at something of ineffable beauty, beyond her ability to produce or describe. The writing had the grace of flickering flames, and once revealed, Jacob seemed to draw strength from it. He stood straighter, his chin up, his eyes closed in serenity. As if to challenge his rediscovered dignity, Xandes narrowed the stream again and made Jacob turn while she sprayed it into his backside. Sabrina crossed her arms to convey her impatience. Xandes finally turned off the water. From a locker in the corner, she removed a towel and threw it to him. While he dried himself, she produced a med kit, removing a jar of salve and bandages.
"You'll have to apply this."
She smiled and tossed them to Sabrina. She caught the first aid items and stepped forward, telling Jacob to kneel and place his hands behind his back. He cooperated while she snapped a restraining seal around his wrists, then began to open the salve container. So close to him she was aware of his eyes. Even within the dim lighting of the showers, they were an electric blue. He had been washed free of the desert, but it was still present between them on the floor, on her uniform, drifting off to form a muddy swirl on the floor. She cleaned and dressed the gash on his forehead, then turned to one on his shoulder. As she covered it with a bandage, she felt remorse at concealing the flowing script.
"The writing. It's beautiful. Why do you all have it?"
"So we don't forget."
"Don't forget what?"
"To seek the temple, and to return."
"Return where?"
"The desert."
He stared down at the dust from her boots, mixing with the water and slipping away toward the drain. Then his eyes focused on her with an urgent intensity.
"Sabrina, you will go there. I know you will. It's where you'll find the truth."
Sabrina's hand froze where she touched his skin.
"What are you two lovers saying?"
Xandes asked from across the room. It startled Jacob. His thoughts seemed to scatter like autumn leaves in a wind, and confusion returned to his face.
"Where am I?"
"Nice job interrupting an interrogation." Sabrina spat over her shoulder.
"If that's what you want to call it,"
Xandes said, throwing a white gown their way. It fell on the floor. Sabrina tried to pick it up quickly from the wet shower floor, but it was damp, and she slid it over Jacob. It looked ugly and awkward on his frame, especially with the script now partially covered. The points, glyphs, and serifs peeked out, as if struggling to free themselves. The two women led him down a corridor to a heavy door with a thick glass window. Xandes typed a code into the keypad next to it. Sabrina took a long breath before it opened.
"Don't be scared," she said to Jacob. "You can rest here tonight. You will be safe."
The door slid to the side. Lights flicked on the moment Xandes entered, revealing a hall the length of a pitchball field. Identical doors with hexagonal windows faced each other from either side. Xandes marched past them, her eyes fixed ahead of her, the muscles in her jaw working. As soon as she passed by the first door, the screaming began. Hands covered in the same black writing as Jacob's pounded the glass. Sabrina tightened her grip on Jacob, his eyes wide with terror. Panicked voices called out.
"Help, please! Where am I? Please let me out! What did I do?"
Sabrina could not imagine the confusion and utter horror of waking in a place and not knowing how she had arrived there. To make this discovery multiple times, as her memory reset over and over again, as it would be for a script, made her stomach twist and ache. Xandes must have read the concern on her face. In an odd moment of understanding, she said,
"They won't remember this place once they are rehabilitated. It's unpleasant, but necessary so they won't hurt themselves."
Sabrina nodded. She knew all scrits would be sent, eventually, to a rehabilitation center. Her uncle had assured her that there were treatments for scrits, and that they could make a recovery that allowed them to live happily the rest of their lives. But where they came from in the first place, what the occultists had done to them, she was not sure. No one was. Her uncle had only said that they were a tragedy that required patience, mercy, and understanding. Sabrina had never met a recovered scrit, but it was not an experience she would openly share if she had been rehabilitated. Maybe she knew rehabilitated scrits and did not even realize it. She wondered if Jacob had a family he had run away from. Had he fallen into the clutches of occultists who had brainwashed him? Would he be able to return to his family? Were they looking for him? She had processed dozens of scrits, and until this night, had never cared. They were mainly a nuisance, but now one had told her his name. He had become a person. She noticed a gloved hand thumping at a window. She had heard that while they waited to be shipped out, some scrits became truly deranged, scratching at the walls of the cells until their nails peeled away from their fingers. These had to be protected from themselves. First the gloves. Then came gags to keep them from using their teeth to chew at the gloves. Some were placed in padded cells. Animals. "When is the next transport?" Sabrina asked.
"There is one tomorrow morning,"
Xandes said.
"That's why so many of the cells are full."
She keyed open one of the last doors. A faint whiff of urine drifted out. Jacob slowed, starting to resist. Sabrina stiffened her own grip on him. Xandes stepped inside to inspect the room. It was empty but for a toilet and a sleeping pallet against the wall.
"What is going to happen to me?"
Jacob asked, holding his ground outside the door. Out of the corner of her eye, Sabrina noticed Xandes lowering the sedation stick. "You will spend the night here," Sabrina said, putting some steel into her voice. "In the morning they will take you somewhere to restore your memories."
"But wait!"
"Trust me," Sabrina said, willing herself to detach from the whole situation, aware she had lost the distance that professionalism required. Where was Sean when she needed him?
"You will be fine, Jacob. I promise."
He looked to Xandes, who had her thumb poised to depress the charge on the sedation stick. He relented and let Sabrina lead him into the room, where she sat him down on the sleeping pallet. She turned immediately to leave, avoiding the imploring expression on his face and his eyes full of hope and terror. The door slid shut behind her and Xandes. She walked swiftly away while Xandes typed in a code to secure the cell, after which she tried to catch up with Sabrina.
"Jacob?"
Xandes asked, her eyebrow cocked as she came alongside Sabrina.
"You did not mention that he shared his name with you."
"Must have slipped my mind,"
Sabrina said, busying herself with her belt. "Can't even be sure that's really his name." Her visor, hooked onto her hip, was vibrating. She grabbed it, but knew she could not answer it in the hall, as the chorus of pounding and pleading had begun anew.
"Shut it!"
Xandes screamed, rapping on the windows with the stick. Her voice rose with every door she passed.
"Shut it! Shut it! Shut it!"
Sabrina reached the end of the corridor and was grateful to have the door closed between her and Xandes, silencing the sound of the detention officer's voice. She opened her visor. It was Sean. Relief coursed through her. She snapped it onto her forehead and noticed the hour. It was morning.
"I got a lead on our friend with the knife,"
Sean said. Sabrina wondered how he even knew about Jacob, as she had not yet filed a report. But then she realized he meant Orhem.
"The one who tried to add some ventilation to your armpit?"
"The very. The deed for the shop was co-signed by an Anselm Jackson. I've got his address in my hand. I say we do some surveillance."
"Are you back?" she asked, listening to the background noise of conversations, footsteps, and intercoms that sounded like the station office.
"Discharged yesterday."
She leaned against the wall, the muscles in her back relaxing. She caught sight of her face in the screen of a blank detention monitor. She was grinning like a schoolgirl. Sean had described how he got an early discharge from the hospital. She half listened. If he was calling her, she deduced that Dag's order for her to be assigned to scrit duty had yet to filter down to Sean. Her uncle assumed that she would follow his orders without question. She had not slept all night. Sean was beginning his shift and probably wondering why she was late.
I'll be there in 10 minutes.